Well, Shabbat Shalom to all my family and friends. This is Torah Talks with Tony and Bill. I'm Tony. This is Bill, also known as Papa B. Some of you guys may know him as the Rabbi Son. We're going to get into some talks today concerning, or just kind of picking up from where we left off last Shabbat when we talked about circumcision, and we got into a little bit of that, but we want to get into a little bit more of the definition. But first, I kind of want to just introduce it by going back and talking about the mass circumcision. We talked about global ecclesiastical circumcision. Papa B introduced the two concepts of mass, mass being the number, and then mass being that actual issue, that cancerous type thing that has to be removed. And that was good stuff. I really enjoyed last week. Listen, we want you to continue to pray for our country and those who are affected by the decisions we make in this country. We understand that there is a responsibility laid upon a country that has been given the notoriety for being a free world. And so there is a responsibility that comes with that. And we want to make sure that we're praying into that responsibility and that we do the right thing, that we do the God thing in this season, and that we truly let our light shine. That's what Papa B and I was talking about. I think last week we talked about we may want to start including you guys in on some of the conversations that take place prior to, because those are good conversations. But anyway, so do the right thing. Mass circumcision, global ecclesiastical circumcision. I'm going to read a little bit of this prophetic word. That's where this is coming from. And it says, I believe the church, if you would have entered into a time of mass circumcision like unto that which took place during the time of Moses after the mass deliverance of the Hebrew people from Egypt. The effect will yield a similar environment to that which surrounded the time of Israel's circumcision. So although we know there is more to the prophecy than that, we want to use this to start our conversation today. Another part of that is we are awakening to covenant and self-denial and reawakening to the surrender and downdraft of heaven, willing to commit ourselves and our households to that purpose. And that was something that was introduced a couple of Sabbaths back when Papa B and I began to really dig into what circumcision is, what should it look like in our personal lives. And this was one of it: surrendering, denial, things of that nature. But today we want to start with the prophetic word found between two parshas on at least two occasions. I'm going to read the first one, and both has the circumcision concept nestled between the two partials. I love that because of the implications there. But this one is, we'll read Genesis 17 verses 10 through 14, and then we'll get into this a little bit more. So this is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your posterity after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. And you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token or sign of the covenant, the promise or pledge between me and you. And he says, he who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised. Every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner, not of your offspring. He that is born in your house and he that is bought with your money must be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the male who is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. That verse 14, and the male who is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off. The second set of parshas that we'll look at, where Zipporah, Moses' wife, comes and she circumcises his son, and you know the story. But there's a part in that says God would have killed Moses had this not happened. Before we get into the word between the parshas, can you speak a little bit on that, because that seems pretty serious?
As far as the issue of what the Holy One would have done to Moshe. Well,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of times we read these things in English, and so we immediately jump to conclusions. Sometimes our religious backgrounds fill in those blanks with words and with ideas, with concepts. If we if you understand that every Hebrew verb that's used is a continuum of action from a seed to a mature plant to reproducing seed. Then when you see this word that's translated in English as kill, you got to understand that now we're talking about setting in motion a process that will result in the death of Moshe. And he is indeed going to do that. And yes, the circumcision issue is this process is now in motion. The children there, his sons, that he birthed through Zipporah, are the ones who actually got the circumcision. He didn't do it. Zipporah did it. And as she does so, she throws the excess flesh at his feet and calls him a name, a bridegroom of blood, Hatan Hadam. And in this process, we see that there's this, she is losing Moshe, and she knows it. And the children are losing Moshe's physical presence as well. And so what's happening is these are transitional stories, transitional epochs. This is the only issue of the circumcision that we're talking about. We are in a transitional epoch. Yes. This is a season when the people of the creator of the universe, those who have been called after the nature of Avram, of Abraham, after this nature in this process, are separating themselves, not because we're better than somebody else, more righteous, more holy than others. We're not separating ourselves from other people as much as we're separating ourselves unto the creator and his plan and his beauty. And this is what's happening with Moshe here. Moshe is being consecrated. He's leaving. He's leaving Zipporah and his life in the desert over there at the area where he was with Midian, the Midianites. And he's going to embark upon his role that he was designed before the foundation of the world to serve and to follow. So are we. Yes. This is what the mass circumcision is about. And when we have this transitional epoch, we've only talked about one of those parshas. We talked about Genesis 17, and the last part of Lech Lecha, the parsha of Lech Lecha. And we didn't get into what comes next. Right. And that's the transitional epoch when he begins to affect the world. Avram circumcises, goes through the process. Everything that happened from 12 to 17 in the chapters has happened. And as a result, he is now prepared for the transitional epoch in which he will begin to impact the world. Right. And he does. And some things with Moshe. And we get down to Parsha Shemot and Exodus, and we get then into Va'era, the next Parsha, which we haven't talked about yet. Right. Interestingly, the same basic root word for both of those Parshas. So Va'era and Va'era. Appeared, right. Yeah, okay, exactly. Okay. And he appeared and I appeared. Okay. It's basically how that kind of, and then appeared. So we have these transitional epochs, and to understand this prophetic word that has been given and that we're working through and working on right now, the first thing we really need to grasp is that right now, at this season, in this instant, this is the time for us to arise. Yes. And this is the time for us not to be disgusted at the world, but to understand we have a higher calling and a higher purpose, and that's what we're heading into. And our relationship with the Creator must be tight. It must be beautiful, and it must be powerful, and we must be surrendered. We must be self-denying. Yes. The things that make up the concept of what circumcision is. Yes. We must be that because the world desperately needs it, and this is the season in the plan and the strategy and the timing of God. So when we talk about nestled between the two parshas, this first one that you just mentioned, Lech Lecha, for yourselves go, right? I remember when I first heard you teach on that, because I hadn't heard it like that, for yourselves go, but that is the translation. That's how it's broken down. And so for yourselves go out, and then between for yourselves go out and he appears is this circumcision. I thought that was amazing, because now we're seeing he calls him, right? He calls him, he says, it's time to go out. It's time to separate from your father's house and that process and go into this place. And the journey is about to start. Circumcision is important before he takes off into this journey. Can you talk a little bit about that? We're talking about the two different phases of each one of our lives. And we're using Avram and then we're using Moshe as the basis of our discussions, but it applies to you and this applies to me. And the first one is the awakening to our identity. And the awakening to our, go out for yourself. Find out who you are. Find out why you're here. Find out what is written in the book of the Creator, the book of life, about you, why you're here, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to think, how you're supposed to change the environment of every sphere of influence you enter into. Find out what that is, but that's only phase one. That's the identity phase. And it's just the labels that I put on these things because it helps me to put some substance to them. So the identity phase is what's happened in Lech Lecha. Avram's got the identity phase is what's happened in Shemot and the calling. And Moshe is finally awakened that he's something more than just a shepherd on the backside of Midian or something more than a prince of Egypt, as the case may be. He's something more. He has a destiny purpose. So this issue of identity has come forth. But the transitional epoch is to go from identity to mission, to actually engaging in your purpose. And that's where the circumcision has to take place. You can find out who you are, and you can become real proud about it. You can become self-righteous about it. He said, no, if you're going to enter into your mission and your purpose and your function as to who you really are, get past the identity into your actual functioning fruit. Oh, that's good. Because by fruit comes out of mission. And mission comes out of purpose. And that's where we have to have this. This is why we correspond this to the agricultural. A tree is planted. And it grows for these 4 years. And it becomes what it is. It's already producing some level of apple or pear or peach or plum or whatever it may be. But it's a certain place at which it is opened up into its fruitfulness, into its fullness of its, and that's the stage of Orlah, the stage whenever we now begin to say it is a circumcised tree. Same with us. We reach this point when identity begins to actually have substance and fruit to it. And that's the transitional epoch. And that's the place of circumcision.
So that's important. One of the things that when you were saying identity, go find out who you are. And so I remember, because we're still talking about our transition, right? And that was huge. You know, when we first left the systems, if you would, we really didn't understand what was going on. We felt the drawing, we felt the pull, and we stepped out of that, and that took courage, but I know it was the Lord leading me out of that, because I never would have left on my own. And so when I stepped out of that, my mind wasn't saying, go find out who you are. I didn't have this passage of scripture leading me, right? I just knew that there was something more. There was something that he was wanting to introduce me to, wanting to expose me to, and I didn't feel like it was going to happen where I was. So leaving the Lech Lecha moments for us, and I'm sure if we had the group in here, each one of them would have their own Lech Lecha moment. But that's why we wanted to share this with you, because we're still talking about our journey too. We're still talking about our process. We're still talking about that bridge. And so many of you have even begun to reach out to me concerning your own process. And I would encourage you to understand what we're saying today is, yes, Abba wants you to find your identity. He wants you to do what Avram did. He wants you to step out, and that sometimes that means separating from. But I like what you said. It's not just that if we just stop at separating from, then we still get lost in this thing. But and then we reattach to something else. Yeah.
Well, and part of the issue is how you let yourself feel about where you left. Usually, it's like an eagle with a nest. The mother eagle finds a way to make the nest as uncomfortable as possible. As the eaglets get a little older and they need to find a way to function outside of that nest, she begins to pull the feathers out, and the mother eagle, and she begins to make where every time the eaglet turns around, it's like, this is not comfortable here. You may have felt that. Where it seems like something's not just right. It used to be good. It's not good anymore. So the first thing that we feel in this lech lecha, going out process, is mostly just discomfort. We can't stand this anymore. We don't know why. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's better. And so there's a lot of negativity in this process. It's part of the nature of the beast. You must want to leave. It's like in Egypt, the people had to want to leave.
Right.
It wasn't a matter of being taken out. God could have translated them out like that. They could have popped out in a second. It was about God had to make them want to leave. So that's what he did with the whole 10 plague thing, was making them want to leave.
Right.
Well, when we talk about systems of this world, we talk about institutions, we talk about functions, ministries that we do, we talk about involvements that we have, in entanglements, I sometimes call them.
Right.
Unless they get uncomfortable, we'll never leave. Even if we understood that we're supposed to go somewhere else, we'd have reasons and excuses, and timing issues arise. And so the Holy One makes it uncomfortable. And at first, it's just a matter of the discomfort and the displeasure that we experience. Oh, but that's not what this is about. And the good news is that someone to come who goes before you, we're talking about the bridge, we're talking about this issue. Having someone who has gone before you tell you, I know you're uncomfortable. I know you feel like it's just not right. And I know that I know what's happening. God is making it uncomfortable for you because he wants you to step out. But he wants you to step out to find who you really are. And get to the place where you're ready to jump into the purpose for which he put you on the earth in the first place. That's where we want to go. And that's the glorious, joyous thing. We're not leaving. And a lot of people that are in the systems and in the institutions and in the ministry concepts that we're involved in, they feel like we're just rebelling. They think we're just mad, or we're offended, or we're self-righteous, or think we're better than they are. Those experiences might be actually true to some level at the beginning because of the discomfort level that hits us. But that's not where this is going. And to understand that there is a process God has designed and a series of phases he designs to take us to. He puts us into interaction then with people that A, inspire us, and B, frighten us, intimidate us. And so that's the process of learning how, because the first thing we do when we step out of a situation, of an institution, of a system, is to begin to react against it and react against the discomfort we felt there. So it's not that we're trying to do something great, it's that we're trying not to be like that. Now, that is not the end result. That is not the goal. That is not the objective, just to not be like that. We're supposed to be a brilliant counterculture, one that actually has an energy of holiness to it, that draws others into it, not from the standpoint of, okay, we're better than they are, we've grown, to the standpoint of, now we can help you bridge to the place where you were designed to function and bring forth much fruit.
So that's back to the circumcision. So when we talked about circumcision, when you look at the second example, which is the Moses example in Exodus, we see this between the 13th and 14th Parsha. So we see Shemot and then we see Vayera. So again, there seems to be a progression. There seems to be these steps that it's like it's a narrated. So it's like we see him, or we see Avram, we see Moshe, and there's this progression here. I'm gonna call you into this place. I'm gonna move you into this place. And with Moshe, there was a conversation that went back and forth, him constantly speaking into Moses and preparing him for this journey. The circumcision before the appearance. How much does circumcision play in interacting with Abba at that next phase, at that next level?
Obviously, since he has designed this as his process that we go through, immediately, instinctively, we know it's very important. Let's kind of talk about how and why it's so important. Well, the first reason is because he doesn't want us to come into our new season, our new fruitfulness level, our new impact level with a lot of our flesh hanging out. If you can get what I'm saying here.
Yes.
The circumcision in the natural realm is to cut off excess flesh. It's that which is susceptible, easily interacting with the world and taking in its toxins. So our flesh needs to be peeled back in every aspect of it. We'll get maybe next week or another time. We'll get into what the aspects of our flesh are, the areas in which our flesh has to be peeled back, more than just the male reproductive organ that we've talked about. But here's the idea of why circumcision is so important, is because it begins to let the neshama in us, the life force, the breath of God in us, come forth and actually take more, be more visible than the flesh, the nephesh, the animal-like nature that we have. We come into this world as a nephesh who has somewhere down within us breathed the breath of God, the very breath that Adam was breathed into in Genesis 2:7. Somewhere down in each of you, in each one of us, and your children and your children's children, will always be this hint of a breath of the creator of the universe, the neshama, that as it infills the lungs, as it begins to empower you, this is like breath in the Spirit and in the Holy Spirit. We know these phrases, and it is this neshama. The neshama is just the Hebrew word that refers to the fact that the Spirit is in you, waiting to be opened up, waiting to become full, grow, and then emerge, because it has to come out of the flesh. And that's really what happens in a physical circumcision, and in a spiritual circumcision that we're talking about here. It touches every facet of your life, in every facet of your life, to let that neshama displace the nephesh, where what the world sees and how you interact doesn't take in the toxins of the world, but instead releases the ruach, the Spirit, the life force of God. That's why the circumcision is important. The excess flesh prevents that from happening.
Yes. When I think about this story, Moses, this story starts with the children of Israel crying out, right? And so there is a suffering going on there, and we know there's a timing going on as well, but there's suffering going on. There is this uncomfortable thing taking place, and they're crying out of that discomfort. And my heart is that they're crying out to Abba because this is not who they were. This is not who they are, and this is not what they were created to be or to be doing. And so this system that they're in, this environment that they're in, is restricting what they were actually called to do and the people they were called to be. So they're crying out of that place. Moses is coming as a result of Abba answering this cry, correct? He's ready to do something now. He's ready now that I like what you said, they gotta want it, right? Now that they sense this uncomfortable place, now that they're crying out of this place, whether it be because of the taskmasters or the environment or whatever, they're crying out and they're ready to make the transition. And so Abba is there on one scene, and I want to say this, in one scene, if we could split them up in scenes, there is a people crying out, right? In another area, in another scene, Abba is preparing a man to go and address this cry. Now, they don't see Moses in preparation. They don't hear the conversation between Abba and they don't know that this is going on. So you got two scenes going on. You got a people crying out. They're ready to be delivered. And then you got a man that Abba is addressing, and he's preparing for this mass deliverance. What I see right now is all of these things that are going on in the earth is producing this cry. People are crying out. And that's one scene. But on another scene, there's this global ecclesiastical circumcision taking place, and it is to prepare these individuals to answer the cry. Do you agree?
Yes, I mean, and that's the beautiful thing is as we try to help bridge and help this transition, this change that we're talking about, is to have someone on the other side that says, you're not doing this. Is not just this happening to you. There is a movement taking place. And it has heard many, many cries of many, many innocents and many, many guilties. I mean, we didn't talk about the cry that took place in Lech Lecha, the end of Lech Lecha, right before this issue of the circumcision, before we go into Vayera and Genesis. The cry comes because Sarah has decided to in the flesh, find a way to help God's plan along,
Right.
and has hooked up Avraham with Hagar,
Right.
and there's been a baby born as a result of that union, and it got tense up in there. And Hagar runs off to go, and she's upset, and she kind of, everybody has their flesh moments,
Right.
and she had her flesh moment, Sarah had her flesh moment, and both of them are absolutely uncomfortable with the way things are. So now it's just two people. Well, probably Ishmael was in there somewhere, and there's this process, and you think it was comfortable for Avraham?
No,
probably not. If you're mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, as they say.
Right.
And so you see, this is the protocol. And to understand that the things that we feel that are uncomfortable, and the things that we see birthed out of our flesh that begin to cause conflict and disagreement and make things even more uncomfortable for us, that's a part of the process as well.
Wow. So there may be people right now that are watching us that are feeling this discomfort, right? And they're thinking, what's going on? For years I was okay with this, right? Now I'm not. And I'm really feeling I'm in a tough place. I'm in a sticky place because there's a lot associated with this, right? I'm tied into this in so many different ways. I'm starting, but at the same time, there is a pull. I'm crying out. So for you that are watching, the reason that we're having this discussion is because we know that there are individuals that are crying out. We know that this story is prophetic in that it's calling many of us. It's calling the sons of God, the Bane of Yah. It's calling us out of these places. So here's the scripture that I hear for those of you that are listening right now. Come out from among them and be ye separate, says the Lord, and I will receive you. What I hear in that is that Abba knows where you are, and that he is waiting for you to step into that place. It's a challenge. It's a difficult place, but he will breathe energy and courage into you to step into those places and trust him for the rest of that journey. I'm going to ask Papa B to pray for you. If you would just join us in prayer right now, I'm going to ask him to pray for you that your journey may be peaceful.
Father, Abba, you who has known the ways and the plans for these that are listening and watching, those of us who are here in this room, all of us, Father, we surrender to you. We submit our lives to you, understanding that you will direct our paths. And that's my prayer for each one who's listening today, each one who's watching today, that even at this moment, you will build a confidence in them that you are directing every step of their paths, and every encounter and every interaction and every even difficulty and challenge that they experience is like an obstacle course that you have designed for them. May they understand your hand and feel your tender and gentle guiding hand leading them through this process, and speak to them. Speak, I pray, Father, your prophetic word through human beings and through your spirit into their spirits to tell them how you respond to these challenges, and these interactions will determine how quickly you move from your identity phase into your mission, purpose, and fruitfulness phase. Father, guide them every step of the way, direct them, love them, but also discipline them and train them as good soldiers and servants of the King and developers of a counterculture. May you be blessed in all things. May your strength come into you. May wisdom be upon you. May you be able to hold your heart and hold your tongue in check for the sake of the King and the kingdom of heaven, for the Lord our God, our King. May his will be done in your lives. Amen.
Hey, pray for our country and those who are affected by the decisions we make in this country. Shabbat Shalom.